Hey everyone, welcome back to the gaming classroom. Today we're going to be talking about global operations, which is a topic that I'm studying in my MBA program. Global operations in general is thinking about things from an input, process, and output perspective. And when we think about it, we can look at it from business and management. We can look at it from software engineering and gaming. So today we'll talk about the inefficiencies that we can see in operations. So we'll see how these things are dealt with, how high performance teams in those kinds of areas in business, software engineering, and games, and what they look like when they're performed very, very well, and what we could all aspire to be. So let's first look at games, because games are fun to talk about. So let's start there, all right? Let's write that down first. Great. So we have this grid. We're talking about inputs, processes, and outputs because these are the general principles that we're going to be looking at when it comes to talking about global operations. So let's talk about games because games are fun. So when I think about inputs, processes, and outputs when it comes to games, I think about the very common games that I love talking about and playing. It's about Dota 2, League of Legends, Mobile Legends. These are multiplayer online battle arena games where you have 5 versus 5 heroes, and this is one of the inputs, right? In a game, you have 5 versus 5 heroes. So we have 5 versus 5 heroes segmented into 3 different lanes. And this is your input. And we consider this your input because these are the cards that you're dealt with. These are your inputs. These are the choices, the decisions that people make before the game. That's why these are your inputs, the decisions, right? And when I think about the processes, I think about, for example, while you're in the game, you are actually performing laning, you're farming, you're ganking, you're getting kills, and you are warding and dewarding. These are concepts very common in these MOBA games. And finally, the output. Can you guess what the output is? The output is actually not getting kills. The output is actually getting objectives, right? And ultimately, that's what Dota 2 is about. It's not about getting kills. It's about, getting the throne. And when you think about the concept of games in Dota 2, there's a lot of operational inefficiencies that can happen. For example, in Southeast Asia, the community is very toxic. And I'm sure here in North America, League of Legends, toxicity is a very common culture in video gaming globally, right? So global operations, global gaming, there's that inefficiency when it comes to the culture of gaming, and that affects the communication styles between people that are playing. And a common principle or a common recommendation that we hear from coaches nowadays is just mute everybody and perform well. Let's now look at software engineering from an operations perspective. What are its inputs? What are the processes that it has? And what are its outputs? So when I think about software engineering, I think that the inputs here are product specifications, system architecture, specifications. These are the things that are asked by your CTO, your team leads, your engineering leads, your product team, asking you to do these certain things. When it comes to the processes that you involve yourself with, this would be product management, project management, making sure you hit your deadlines, software engineering itself, doing the programming, experience design, and actually deploying the software. Your output here would be an actual app production release, which gets into the hands of your users and they enjoy your application. Again, here, there are also operational inefficiencies. For example, not being able to work well with the different teams that you're working with. Maybe the product team isn't working well with the project management or the software engineering team. Or there's a miscommunication about what the marketing team wants to write as copy text on your actual website or your application. So there's these kinds of misunderstandings, misalignment. Those are challenges. Finally, when we look at business and management, I think that these are its inputs and processes. Generally, when I think about business, it's ultimately delivering value to the market. So the input here is understanding what does the market want, right? So it's ultimately market demand. That's why marketing is such a crucial aspect of business, because they are the ones, performing all of that human-centered design and market research, trying to quantify the market so that we know which business to actually get into, right? But when we think about the processes that businesses encounter, in general, this would be how do we finance the business? Where do we get the money to pay the people to do the actual work? Who's going to be leading and managing the operations of that actual work? And there's marketing, right? Like making sure that we're delivering it to the people that will be willing to pay for it. Marketing has a lot of different aspects to it. There's business development, whether that's advertising and everything. And in general, there's also developing your supply chain. There's a lot more stuff that goes into operating a business, but these are some aspects that we can talk about. So when we think about the output of the business, ultimately it's sales. It's being able to create things from your inputs, add some value, and then selling it to people who see that value and say, hey, that's worth my money. Here, take it, right? So that's the general perspective of inputs, processes, and outputs when I think about global operations. Now, when we think about inefficiencies in business and management, well, there are times where there are teams that are isolated and they're not able to communicate across departments. This is the differences that you might encounter in the different scales of businesses. Startups are very cross-functional. It's very easy to communicate. The hierarchy is not like huge and very distant from the decision makers. It's very flat. People can just immediately communicate and talk with each other. But in large corporations, you really feel the stability of your job because you're just really one cog in the whole machine. These are some of the challenges or inefficiencies that you might encounter in business because of those kinds of misalignment and miscommunication. And this is one of the reasons why we studied a book called Boundless. Forgot the name of the author, but I'll put it on the video. Talks about the importance of communication and developing an organizational culture that promotes that kind of alignment and clarity that enables you guys to be able to operate independently, right? So now I've talked a little bit about the inefficiencies that you might encounter in these different contexts. And I'm sure when you play video games, you know what an inefficient team looks like. It's you guys aren't jiving, you guys aren't going at the same time, you guys are late by like 10 seconds or late by 20 seconds and you're frustrated, you're trying to communicate, and it's just you guys aren't on the same page. And this is what happens when your team doesn't know what you want to do and you don't know what your team wants to do. Ultimately, it's a miscommunication. That's why you guys aren't able to apply the same strategy and get all of the efficiencies in a team that works boundlessly, right? So when I think about a very effective team in games, this means that even though you guys are segmented into 3 different lanes, that's perfectly fine because you guys are doing all of the responsibilities that you're supposed to do in those different lanes. For example, in Dota 2, there might be the case where you don't win all of the lanes. You're only supposed to win 2 of the 3. That's because of the matchup that you have from the inputs, right? Well, we picked an early offlane hero. He's gonna get shit on by the enemy carry, but our mid lane and our carry ourselves, our own carry, will be able to perform very well. So for that offlane player, they just need to survive and not die. That is the strategy, right? But if that kind of communication, that kind of alignment isn't there, then someone who should just be trying to survive might overstep their bounds, take risks they're not supposed to, and lose and die, and give up some space in the game, right? And those are the challenges. But when you actually perform it really well, you guys are compensating and learning to take the risks that you can manage and trying to minimize the dangers that you don't need to take. That's what it looks like in games. It's about knowing, okay, warding and dewarding is a priority in our game right now, then we should do that because our early game and our mid game, we are very weak. So we need to have as much information as possible so that we can minimize all of the dangers and the ganks and the kills that the enemy team could possibly do. We just need to be fluid enough. We need to know the timing of our strengths and our weaknesses, so we can strategize, so we can communicate and strategize. I think when it comes to software engineering, it's also quite similar. In software engineering, this would be having clear instructions, clear directions from the product and the system architecture design, which allows your software engineers to prioritize which of the work needs to be done first, which would help clarify the rest of the things that need to be done. When I think about software engineering, part of this process of creation is a mix of trying to plan out what we might see when we actually go there and do the work. And this would be like the specifications. These would be your tasks. These would be your project management, print tasks, and everything that you'd be doing. As you build these kinds of approximations or plans or maps, right? Only when the software engineers gets deep into the dirt, they're actually doing the actual work of plugging out the actual data structures and the algorithms that need to be applied. Then we find the actual specific challenges of accomplishing those plans, of accomplishing those maps. So an effective team is able to communicate and align on the general direction of what the product and what the system should be able to do, but then they're also able to strategize such that these software engineers are able to prioritize which of the tasks I need to do first, so that we can minimize the uncertainty and lack of information that we have. Right? And this is a balance between how much experience the software engineer has and how complex the work needs to be. Because if you are inexperienced and you don't know how to navigate that kind of area of uncertainty, then that introduces even more risk, even more potential inefficiencies in integrating with the other teams. So what does an effective team look like? An effective team looks like, okay, I am a mid to senior level software engineer. I'm confident with 80% of the work that you've already described. I know I can do it. I have a general idea of how it's going to be done. But there's this 20% that's pretty complicated because that's something that I have not yet done myself yet. So I have very low confidence with the way that the task is described because it's not fully fleshed out. The details aren't there. There's a lot of research that needs to be done. So at the start of the sprint, I'm going to prioritize that one first because I want to make sure that this task that we think we understand, we get a better understanding of its estimates, if it's really doable within a certain period. Doing that first, rather than taking on the easy work that I know that I can do, prevents us from taking miscommunication debt when we have those kinds of, we're just 2-3 days left from the work. Oh, I didn't realize this other task was actually a huge thing that we need to split up further. These kinds of delays affect the whole operation of the business from the engineering perspective, because you need to communicate that level of uncertainty, that level of confidence that you might have in a task. You have to communicate that with your project managers. You have to communicate that with your product team. You have to communicate that with your architects in case they might need to figure out some other challenges or options or advice that they might be able to give you. That's what an excellent team looks like. They prioritize those areas of uncertainty. They do that research very early, and they communicate very well with the rest of the team. That prevents misalignment, that enables people to strategize together very well. That's coming from the engineering perspective. So now let's look at it from the business management perspective. So business and management is something that I'm studying right now. I'm new to this space. But when I think about the input, the operations, the process that it has, and the outputs that it has, I think that there's a lot of inefficiencies that can happen generally when direction isn't set very well by leadership. So what do I mean by that? When you think about the business that you're building and you're the founder, you're the CEO, you set the direction of where your whole organization, your whole team is going, right? So for example, we are going to be serving, let's say, mid to senior level software engineers. We're going to be creating a coaching and mentoring program for them. So we want to uplift and develop skills, the capacities of these junior developers, or to become senior level, to become architects, to become staff engineers, etc. And when I think about inefficiencies here, well, that might be a challenge when the direction is set. Yes, we want to develop these kinds of skills. These are the value that we want to deliver to our customers. But then there might be some misalignment in strategy. For example, how exactly are we going to do that? Is it going to be through one-on-one coaching and mentoring? Is it going to be recorded videos of one-on-one coaching that people can watch? Is it going to be some kind of platform that they're going to be using so that it's actually scalable? Which kinds of segments in the market are we going to be targeting first? So those kinds of things, if the leadership hasn't fully decided on those yet, right? So there's market demand, there's also leadership direction, right? And strategy. So if those things aren't decided yet, then it's going to be hard for the rest of the team to think about, okay, well, how are we going to design a business model that makes this whole thing work? And then if that's unclear, then how are we going to calculate how we're going to finance it if we don't know what exactly is our business, right? So there's all of these kinds of things that's coming together when there are inefficiencies, and operations wouldn't be able to make it efficient if those kinds of things aren't clear. When I think about, for example, marketing, the way that business generally operates is you have to have measurements. So for example, in marketing, you would be calculating your customer acquisition cost. And if you don't have those numbers, you wouldn't really be able to tackle those inefficiencies and deal with it. For example, in marketing, you might be analyzing the returns that you might be getting from your B2C and B2B sales. And you might be thinking, okay, well, where should we be diverting our efforts? Where is our competitive advantages in our business? Like, should we be focusing on the B2B side or the B2C side? And what are the options that we have, right? So these kinds of decision making that's coming from leadership and the C-level executives and the middle management that's running the whole show, that kind of alignment is really critical, because that's how you have high performance teams that attacks those inefficiencies. So that's a general overview of my reflections about global operations. We've only had a couple of sessions. I think we've only had one session of it yet, but that's a breakdown of my perspectives about global operations from an input, processes, and outputs perspective. One last thing that I want to highlight is that in the context of software engineering, an idea or topic that relates closely to global operations in the framework of inputs, processes, and outputs is this concept of functional programming. In software engineering, functional programming is a paradigm where you just think about things from a functional perspective. And functions generally just have inputs, the process or the thing that you're doing with those inputs to transform it, to do calculations, to change it, and then the output, which is the result of that function. I think that was pretty interesting hearing it from a business perspective and knowing a similar kind of concept in software engineering that I get to see. Thank you so much for listening to this conversation about global operations and functional programming and gaming, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you like these kinds of content, please leave a like, follow our channel, and join our TikTok community where people get to see these kinds of concepts in play. We have a playlist in TikTok right now entitled Strategies in Software Engineering and seeing how they are applied in games. So yeah, go check it out. I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from these different domains that transfer across them. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.